Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock-flavoured podcast. On this show, I'm joined once again by artist, graphic designer, co-host of the Can I Pod with Madness podcast, and the geezer behind this podcast's visual identity, Simon Perrins. And our chosen topic is the final instalment of the first Corum trilogy, The King of the Swords, published in 1971. In fact, the entire trilogy was published in 1971. Along with the rest of that trilogy, later collected as The Prince in the Scarlet Robe, we also had the Jhary Cornelius sequel, A Cure for Cancer, the introduction of Oswald Bastable in Warlord of the Air, and Elric novel, The Sleeping Sorceress, which would later be repackaged as part of the Elric line under the title, The Vanishing Tower, which may or may not be significant. No spoilers yet, though. So 6 novels published in 1 year, arguably Mike's peak in terms of raw novel output, and King of the Swords was his 23rd in a little over 6 years. And that doesn't even include all of his novellas, serials, and short stories, of course. Incredible, really. And as we'll discuss, the year of 1971 forms a bridge between his early period of wild productivity and experimentation, as well as being the final year of his first run as editor of New Worlds, and a more thoughtful, formative, and deliberate approach that would progress through the 1970s as he also expanded his involvement with rock music for a period, including the release of the sole album by his band, The Deep Fix, in 1975. This bridging arc, hinted at in prior books, and the ideas involved begin to very much coalesce and solidify here, but we'll probably get into more detail of that in part 2. If we think of everything before 1971 as the first age of Moorcock, then the following year, which would see the publication of Elric of Melniboné, Breakfast in the Ruins, and the first Dances at the End of Time volume, An Alien Heat, is definitely the start of the second age, culminating perhaps in 1977 with that final rush of Elric novels and fix-ups, following quickly on the heels of Quest for Tanelorn and the final part of the Cornelius Quartet, The Condition of Muzak, and there are some parallels between those two. 1978 was the year of Gloriana and a distinct development of style ahead of the 1980s. So 1971, and The King of Swords in particular, feels very significant in our reread. So, join us. Here we are back in Derry and Toms, and, well, who's back with me? It's Simon Perrins again for the first time in a while. Welcome back, Simon.
Lovely to be here.
Now, Simon, of course, artist, graphic designer, the person behind the visual identity of our podcast, the designer of our latest Patrons Christmas card, which I can't wait to reveal to Patron Demons before long. So very excited about that. I've already put it on.
When do you send them out?
We're going to be sending them out over the next few days, and I've already put it on half a dozen mugs, and I'll be sending you one. So Excellent. Obviously you'll get a Christmas card with your design on it, but you'll also get a mug with your design on it.
Brilliant.
Because why not? Yeah.
Well, it's Christmas.
Yeah. And also, you're a podcast co-host yourself as well, of course. Anybody who's listened to this will know that you have a podcast co-host with your good lady of Can I Pod with Madness. So what's been going on in the world of podding with madness?
Not very much. I think maybe 4 months or 5 months have gone by without me putting one out.
Oh,
and
not
it's
even a
just
Christmas
been
special?
One of those. Well, that's the plan. It is the plan. And we recorded a couple recently, but prior to that, it's just stuff getting in the way and just life. You know? So it might have looked. I really don't know how many people listen. But so to our loyal listeners, it might have looked like we just knocked it on the head. But I keep putting messages out saying, "I swear we're going to record another episode soon." But we've done a couple, and I'm very keen to do some more because I've got some stuff lined up. But it's just fitting in. You know.
Well, you're always bloody gigging and going on holiday.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I can't say that's the like going on holiday is a reason for not doing a podcast for 5 months.
Well, I think it's reasonable. You know, I think it's a reasonable excuse. Who have you been to see in concert? Because you're always away watching your rock and or roll.
We saw most recently we saw Alice Cooper, but we've seen Alice Cooper quite a lot. Supported by Primal Scream, which I thought was a very odd pairing.
Oh yeah, that is a strange pairing.
I do like Primal Scream, but I don't know how some of these gigs get put together because we had tickets for Heart and they cancelled. But I think they were going to be supported by Squeeze, which seems an odd pairing. And we also had tickets for Jhary, and they cancelled, and they were supported by Cheap Trick, which makes a bit more sense. I was really looking forward to seeing Cheap Trick, but no, sadly not. So we haven't got anything lined up. So
I guess it gets to that point where when you're a heritage rock act, you just get lumbered in with all the other heritage rock acts. Yeah, it's a long time since I've seen Alice Cooper. I saw Alice Cooper I think the first time I saw Alice Cooper was maybe the Brutal Planet tour. So I was quite late.
Oh, we saw him on the Brutal Planet tour.
Yeah, and I had no idea who was supporting. So we got in there, sat down, and fuck me, it was Dio. It was absolutely amazing.
Oh, wow. Oh, no.
Yeah.
No, we didn't see... I've seen it. I think I saw him on the tour after that, but my wife did actually see him on that tour, and she was excited about seeing Dio. But the bus driver, because they were on like a package like bus tour where you get the coach, and he got lost.
Oh no,
he got lost, so they missed. I think they just arrived as Dio was leaving the stage.
Oh, what a disaster! Yeah, that's the only time I ever saw Dio live, and it was by accident. Yeah, and it was great.
Right,
it was fantastic. What a show! An interesting show that as well, because of course, I didn't know what to expect from an Alice Cooper show. My mate Stu is a massive Alice Cooper fan and has been since he was at school in the 1970s. So he's seen Alice Cooper numerous times. And, we went along because we thought, this will be good fun. We're looking forward to this. And I can't, was I even with Phil then? I can't even remember whether it was just Stu and Sarah and me or whether Phil was with me. It was quite, because, Brutal Planet's probably 20 years old, isn't it? These days. You still think of Brutal Planet as being recent Alice Cooper, but it's probably 20 years old now.
Yeah.
Because we're all getting fucking old. And, it was absolutely amazing. We were sat in his row seats, and in front of us there was a family, 6 of them. There was grandparents, parents, and children aged about 10, all with Alice Cooper eye makeup on. It was kind of heartening and heartwarming and wonderful. Yeah, but the two little children were absolutely rapt by Dio as well. Oh yeah, they loved it. Yeah, although so did I. Yeah, good stuff. I must say that I haven't been to a gig for fucking ages. Been quite some time since I.
Have you not?
No, I don't think. Have we been to a gig since we saw Duran Duran at the O2 in Leeds? That might be the last time we actually went to a gig. So that's got to be for...
Well, when was that?
Oh, God. That might have even been pre-pandemic. But it was pretty good, actually, because Simon Le Bon is a really entertaining frontman. And they did White Lines. Which I remember...
of course.
I remember seeing him doing White Lines
on the Word.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I remember buying that covers album, Thank You, that had White Lines on it. And to this day, I still think their version of Thank You is better than Led Zeppelin's. There. Shoot me if you disagree, but I don't care. I'm going there. I'm saying it.
Is it? I'm thinking there was a Led Zepp tribute album that was on.
Right.
Oh no, I want to say Tori Amos is on that doing Down by the Seaside with Robert Plant, but she did Thank You as her B-side on one of her early singles, and I always thought that was a better version. Oh. I think it's Thank You.
Yeah, I've got to listen to them side by side now. Interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're here to talk about a book, aren't we? So I could talk about Alice Cooper all evening, and Dio, well, I could talk about Dio forever. But we're here to talk about a book. And what book are we here to talk about? Well, we're back to do the third in the first Corum trilogy, The King of the Swords. So, The King of the Swords. Now, what copy are you reading from?
Well, this is the copy that I've had since I was a boy. It's Grafton. It's an omnibus edition. It's called The Swords of Corum.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful Mark Sawalski cover. Yeah, I'm really sort of glad I had this one, because that was exactly the art that I liked when I was 15, 16.
Yeah. We talked about that image and that artwork on the art episode that we did, didn't we? I, on the other hand, because my is it Grafton or Panther paperback that I've got in my slipcase set is a little bit fragile on the old spine now. and I didn't want to crack it. So I decided that I would slum it and read from the Gollancz collection from about 10 years ago. The Gollancz collection where it
Right.
just had really, really rubbish, bland, colour-coded covers for all of the books. Although it does have the image of Corum, which I think is by a Japanese artist who I'm ashamed to say I forgot the name of. Or is it Robert Gould? No, I think it's a Japanese. I can't remember. Anyway, I should have checked that out before we started talking about editions.
Yoshitaka Amano?
Yes, it may well be. Yeah, I probably should have checked that out.
Definitely did some Elric.
I think he did the Millennium covers. I think this is from a Door paperback, one of the more recent Door paper. Anyway, we can't remember. I'm not going to make myself look foolish by stumbling over any more attempts at trying to identify the author, the artist, which I should have done ages ago. But never mind. So
I feel like that era they're trying to make it look more like literature, right? It's less this, it's less the fancy ghetto. It's a bit more like, no, this is a serious book.
Yeah, this is literary fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah. Did it with Lovecraft.
Yeah. Yeah. There is I don't know what it's called, but we just happened upon it last night. There's a program on BBC Two about 7 or 7:30 on a Tuesday night, and it's essentially a book review program. And we caught some of it last night, and it had Trevor McDonald on it and a couple of other people, and it had Joe Brand on it. All 4 guests brought a book with them that they wanted to talk about, and everybody else would read it. So it's like a book club. And Joe Brand brought this book, and it was a detective book. But when she was asked to describe the book that she brought and everybody else had read, she said, well, it's a thriller, but it's a literary thriller, really, because the author doesn't normally write detective stories. She's just decided to write a detective story on this occasion. And I just thought, fuck off. Oh, it's a detective story. It's a literary thriller. Fuck off. No, I'm not having it. It's a fucking detective book. Own it, suck it up, and enjoy it, and stop being such a bloody highfalutin weirdo about it. Yeah. But yes, literary fantasy.
That's like when people say, oh, it's not really a horror film, or it's not really a sci-fi.
What do they call it these days in movies? Elevated horror. That's become a term, hasn't it?
Oh, God, yeah. What's that?
Yeah. It's elevated
Spent some
horror.
money on it.
Yeah. It's just garbage. Absolute garbage. These people. But anyway, Night of the Swords, the third in the first Corum trilogy, published 1971. And I think, as we will find, in many ways, a touchstone, almost a central cornice of the whole structure of the Eternal Champion series that started in the 60s and developed to this point in 71. And as we'll find, this goes places that I think, had you been reading these Moorcock books throughout the late 60s and then into 1970 and 71 and picked this up, and of course this is published a year before Elric of Melniboné is published, when he's going back and filling in some of the blanks on Elric's narrative. This really does show Moorcock putting his foot down and thinking, right, I'm going to tie all this shit together. And eventually, of course, he would tie it all up with a bow with A Quest for Tanalorn in 1975. So this is him really, really not kicking off, I don't think, because he did touch on some of this stuff, like in Phoenix and the Sword. What year was that published? Can't remember, but he has J-Maze the Crooked from Stormbringer turns up in that, so you start to get these crossovers. And of course, in The Eternal Champion, which was published in the 60s, you've got those bits in italics where he has memories of other lives where the names Corum and Elric will get mentioned. But here, we start to get these active, driven crossovers in a much more established fashion. It's all very interesting. But what has gone before? Do we need to recap the Knight of the Swords and the Queen of the Swords very simply, or is it too complicated to bother? What do you think?
I think everyone listening to this will be well familiar with what happened in those books.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I'd bloody hope so, anyway.
Yeah, and if you're not, go back and listen to our episodes on the Knight of the Swords and the Queen of the Swords and fill yourselves in. But at this stage, so the battle with Queen of the Swords and Zionbag and her lackey, Gain of the Damned, they've been defeated, and banished from this realm. Unfortunately, a lot of damage. King of Luiminesh is dead, his castle is knackered, but the battle with the Mabden and their Chaos allies was won. We don't really know where Glanditha Cray is, the bloody villain, who I think today, in my mind, or is it always the case, is definitely being played by Oliver Reed, in the same way that he looked in Tarnsman of Gore. Tarnsman of Gore, Oliver Reed, that's about right for Glanditha Cray, I think. And the Vadag of another realm, the city in the pyramid, are now settling in this world and rebuilding the ruined castles of the Vadag. The Vadag of the Vadar. Let's not get into the whole pronunciation malarkey again. But yeah, so everything's looking quite swish and settled for Corum. So let's just have a quick read of what's going on. So it seemed that a wonderful new age of peace had dawned both for the Mabden of Luiminesh and for the Vadag, who had been that land's saviours. The threat of chaos was forgotten. Now 2 out of 3 realms, 10 out of 15 planes were ruled by law. Surely, therefore, law was stronger. Most thought so. Queen Creef, the regent of Luiminesh, thought so and told her grandson, King Earnalt, that this was so, and the little king told his subjects that it was so. Prince Uret Hasdun Nuri, ex-commander of the Gulas Korguris, believed it pretty much. The rest of the Vadag believed it too. There was one Vadag, however, who was not so sure. He was unlike others of his race, although he had the same tall beauty of form, the tapering head, the gold-flecked rose-pink skin, fair hair, and almond-shaped yellow and purple eyes. But instead of a right eye, he had an object like the jewelled eye of a fly, and instead of a left hand, he had what appeared to be a 6-fingered gauntlet of similar design, encrusted with dark jewels. Upon his back he wore a scarlet robe, and he was Corum, Hail and Air-Sea, who had slain gods and been instrumental in banishing others, who desired nothing but peace, but could not trust the peace he had, who hated his alien eye and his alien hand, though they had saved his life many times, and thus had saved both Luiminesh and Broan Vadag, and furthered the cause of law. Yet even Corum, burdened by his destiny, knew joy as he saw his old home reborn, for they were rebuilding Castle Iran again, on the headland where she had stood for centuries, before Glanditha Cray had raised her. Of course, Glanditha Cray, the terrible villain who took out his eye and chopped off his hand, back in the King of the Swords, and murdered all of his family, and ruined all of his gymnasia forever. Corum remembered every detail of his ancient family home, and his pleasure grew as the castle grew. Slender tinted towers stood against the sky, and overlooked the sea, which was all boisterous white and green, and leapt about the rocks below, and in and out of the great sea caves, as if it danced with delight at Iran's return to eminence. And inside, the ingenuity and skills of the craftsmen of Gulas Korguris had wrought the sensitive walls, which would change shape and colour with every change in the elements. The musical instruments of crystal and water, which would play tunes according to the manner in which they were arranged. But they could not replace the paintings and the sculpture and the manuscripts which Corum and Corum's ancestors had created in more innocent times, for Glanditha Cray had destroyed them when he had destroyed Corum's father, Prince Klonsky, and his mother, Kola Tolana, his twin sisters, his uncle, his cousin, and their retainers. When he thought of all that was lost, Corum felt a return of his old hatred of the Mabden Earl. Glandith's body had not been found among those who had died at Halwig, neither had they found the bodies of his charioteers, his Denladisi. Glandith had vanished, or perhaps he and his men had died in some remote battle. It required all Corum's self-discipline not to let his mind dwell on Glandith and what Glandith had done. He preferred to think of ways of making Castle Iran still more beautiful, so that his wife and his love, Relina, Margravine of Alamglil, would be even more enraptured, and would forget that when they found her castle, it had been torn down by Glandith so thoroughly that only a few stones of it could be seen in the shallows at the bottom of Moidal's Mount. Jhary O'Connell, who rarely admitted such a thing, was impressed by Castle Iran. It inspired him, he said, and he took to writing sonnets which, somewhat inconsistently, he would often read to them, and he painted passable portraits of Corum in his scarlet robe, and of Relina in her gown of blue brocade, and he painted a fair quantity of self-portraits, which they would come across in more than one chamber of Castle Iran. And Jhary would also spend his time designing splendid clothes for himself, sometimes making whole wardrobes, even trying new hats, though he was much attached to his old one and always returned to it. His little black and white cat with the black and white wings would fly through the rooms sometimes, but most often it would be discovered sleeping somewhere where it was most inconvenient for it to sleep, and so they passed their days. Oh, that's a wonderful setup, and once again, it establishes Jhary as possibly the best character in all of Moorcock.
Of course.
I just love this idea that they wander around the castle and just keep happening across self-portraits he's done of himself and leaving them all over the place. Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, it's brilliant. But Corum is a bit restless. Fair, I reckon. But his rationale is a bit weak to start with because it's snowing. And Corum doesn't like snow, apparently. And there's a really funny part because he's convinced that it's a chaos plot. And Jhary isn't that convinced that it's a chaos plot. And at one point, I think it explains that he gets freaked out when he starts attacking the snow with his sword. And Jhary has to calm him down from attacking the snow with his sword. It all gets a little bit spooky.
It is not the snow's fault, doesn't it?
That's right, he does, yeah. Like, lay off the snow, Corum. Yeah. But after spotting a familiar figure passing over a hillside, Corum gets a bit freaked out, realising he's seen it before. And he realises it's back in the Flamelands when the hand of Quill strangled poor Halifax. Again, for more details, see our Night of the Swords episode. I think Halifax was the guy who, at the time, we thought, oh, this guy's cool. He's probably going to be Corum's companion. And then the hand of Quill strangles him to death. Yeah, he is. Yeah. Sad. Poor old Halifax. But Jhary is not having any of this stuff. And Jhary actually gets a bit shirty. Corum says, well, actually, I've got to do a reading. Do you want to read Corum? And I'll read Jhary. He's just shuddered and remembered the scene, the hand of Quill squeezing the life from the struggling, shrieking Halifax, who had done Corum no harm at all. The roaring flames, the corpse, the blind Queen Urese with her impassive face, the hill, the smoke, a figure standing on the hill watching him, a figure obscured by a sudden drift of smoke.
Perhaps it is only madness, he murmured. My conscience reminded me of the innocent soul I took when I slew Halifax. Perhaps I am remembering my guilt and see that guilt as an accusing figure on a hillside.
A pretty theory, said Jhary almost grimly. But I had nothing to do with the slaying of Halifax, and neither do I suffer from this guilt you people always speak of. I saw the figure first, Corum.
So you did. Corum stumbled through the door of the tower. From his mortal eye streamed tears.
As Jhary closed the door behind them, Corum turned on the stairs and stared up at his friend.
Then what was it, Jhary?
I know not, Corum.
But you know so much.
And I forget much. I'm not a hero. I am a companion to heroes. I admire, I marvel, I offer sage advice which is rarely taken. I sympathise, I save lives. I express the fears heroes cannot express. I counsel caution.
Enough, Jhary. Do you jest?
I suppose I jest. I too am tired, my friend. I am tired of the company of gloomy heroes, of those who are doomed to terrible destinies. Not to mention a lack of humour. I would have the company of ordinary men for a while. I would drink in taverns, tell obscene stories, fart, lose my head to a doxy.
Jhary, you do not jest. Why are you saying those things?
Because I am weary of... Jhary frowned. Why indeed, Prince Corum? It is not like me at all. That carping voice was mine?
Aye, it was.
Corum's frown matched Jhary's.
And I liked it not at all. Why, if you sought to provoke me, Jhary, then...
Wait. Jhary raised his hand to his head. Wait, Corum. I feel as if something seeks possession of my mind, seeks to turn me against my friends. Concentrate. Do you not feel the same thing? Corum glared at Jhary for a moment, then his face lost its anger and became puzzled.
Aye, you are right. A kind of nagging shadow at the back of my head. It hints at hatred, contention. It is the influence of the thing we saw on the hill.
Jhary shook his head. Who knows? I apologise for my outburst. I do not believe that it was myself speaking to you.
I too apologise. Let us hope the shadow disappears.
So something strange is going on. And they're not alone. Rowena has been chowing at servants. And Rowena's normally a pretty chill babe. You know, but oh no, she's chowing at her servants. So something weird is going on. And as we find out in Chapter 2, it's going on all over the joint. So Chapter 2, the sickness spreads. Corum's having rough nights of it, lying awake thinking what a wanker Jhary is, before realising, no, hang on, Jhary's cool, right? Jhary's not a wanker, so something weird's going on. He and Rowena snarl at each other a lot, then make up and weep together. Well, taste of married life, perhaps? Am I right? No, I'm not right. Marriage is cool. Married life is cool. Then Corum takes to cursing and attack. Oh, this is where he curses and attacks the snow. I was getting ahead of myself. The The snow had begun to melt. It was as if, having brought the sickness of rage and malice, it could now leave. Corum rushed about it one day, slashing at it with his naked sword and cursing it, blaming it for their ills. But Jhary was sure now that the snow had merely been a natural occurrence, a coincidence. He ran out to try and pacify his friend. He succeeded in making Corum lower his sword and sheathe it. They stood shivering in the morning light, both half-clad. So there's weird shit going on. There are some wonderful, wonderful exchanges between the two of them as they're as they're falling out with each other. Because Corum says, "Oh, I fear I'll slay Rowena one night." So they're having this conversation, and it says Corum stared at Jhary. The dandy's silk jerkin offended him, although not long since he thought he admired it. And the man's face had an expression on it. What was it? Mocking? Was Jhary mocking him? Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, you know, everybody needs a friend like Jhary, but I think there would be times when you'd look at him being all cool in his silk fineries with his big hat, painting his self-portraits, where you would think, oh, is Jhary a bit of a twat? And then I think you would pull yourself together and decide otherwise. I don't know. What do you think?
This is any flat share, though, isn't it? This is any, you get together with your best friends and you share a house, and after a few months, you are ready to kill them over some tiny little thing. So, I mean, it is understandable.
Yeah, it is true.
The weather thing, I was sort of reading that as a sort of climate change thing, because they talk about Jhary saying something about a larger event, and he's sort of implying that, you know, because it's the conjunction of the million spheres, maybe that's
of course
creating this strange weather. And I couldn't tell whether, you know, they rarely got snow in that part of the world normally, because it is, you know, it's essentially Cornwall, isn't it?
Of course, Cornwall has its own microclimate, doesn't it? Which doesn't tend to get weather as bad as the rest of the UK. The Cornish Riviera, or whatever they refer to it as. Yeah, and we do find later in the book as well that from Lady Jane Pentalion, who we will get to, that they are approaching a conjunction of the spheres, and this is why so much of what goes down in this book is going down. So yeah, all perfectly possible. But I also am really in love with the idea that Corum is so irritable because of this inverted commas cloud of contention that he attacks snow with his sword because it pisses him off so much. So I think it's a sliding scale, and it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
But they do realise that if Corum is going to avoid probably killing Rowena in the middle of the night, they need to go on a sky ship adventure and try and figure out what on earth's going on. So that's what they decide. But they realise that Prince Uret, who is the prince from the city in the pyramid, who has all this great technology, can tip them off about a skyboat. But it turns out they don't have to, because a couple of airboats, skyboats, actually sky ships, they call them sky ships, don't they, approach Castle Aeron, and they're locked in battle, and one sends the other plummeting earthward, tipping its crew out to the deaths. And the victor lands, and the Vadag aboard are all super shirty, and after Corum's blood, it appears, because they're all infected in the brain as well. And although he appeals to their commander's senses, it works momentarily, but one of his men brands him a coward, slays him, and then they all set to murdering each other, and it all goes a bit pear-shaped. Already another man had fallen on the swordsman who had struck Budith down. Two more were slain in almost as many heartbeats. Cries of rage and hatred burst from the lips of the rest. Blood spurted in the grey evening light. The civilised folk of Gulas Corgiris were butchering each other without reason. They were fighting among themselves like so many carrion dogs over a carcass. Crikey. I do like some of the language, though. Once again, Moorcock summoning up images of brutality in just a handful of words that are really, really cool. But Corum, enraged by the slaughter, in Chapter 3, gets caught up in the bloodlust, and when the survivors of the Vadak slaughter turn on him, he butchers them. But the leader of the band, before he dies, tips our heroes off that this is happening everywhere. The Vadak, having now found their new home in this plane, are at war with each other, and all over Luimanesh it's being repeated, and Prince Uret is dead. He's fallen victim to it as well. Fortunately, Jhary, being the cool guy, has come up with an idea for an anti-Raj potion, but there's a slight complication up ahead, as Rowena is having a massive scrap with a couple of her retainers who've attacked her. So there's a lady fight going on, which is all a bit of a mess. So as he entered the gates, he heard a scream and went running through the grey galleries until he entered a room of bright fountains. There was Rowena beating off the attack of 2 of the female retainers. The women were shrieking like beasts and striking at her with their nails. Corum drew his sword again, reversed it, struck the nearest one on the base of the skull. She went down in the other world, foaming at the mouth. Corum leapt forward, and with his jewelled hand struck her on the jaw. She too fell. Corum felt rage rising in him again. He glared at the weeping Rowena. "What did you do to offend them?" Absolutely brilliant. So he goes in, bonks one on the head, gives the other one an open hand slap with his 6-fingered jewelled hand, and knocks her out, and then has a go at his wife for upsetting her retainers to the point where they attacked her. Amazing. Like, what have you done now, you bloody menace? Fabulous.
Up until this point, like, don't you feel like they've sort of forgotten that they're in a trilogy? Because they know that there was the Knight of the Swords, and they know that there was the Queen of the Swords. They're fully aware that the King of the Swords exists, but they were all sort of acting like, oh, everything's fine now. Yeah. And they're sort of surprised that, stuff starts going wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could argue that they thought they might have earned themselves a rest. And to be fair, Corum's been restless right since the very start, but everybody else seems to have started taking it pretty easy, pretty quickly. Yeah. You know, the Vadag of the city and the pyramid are all like, hey, let's rebuild these castles and gymnasium, man, and let's compose some sonnets. You know, they probably should have paid a little bit more attention to what potentially could go on should Lord Mabelard think, you know what, I'm not having this. Which is, well, as it happens, is that what's going on? Oh, well, we find out. Not quite. But of course they are thinking, could Glandith be involved? So they tool up to go and find out. And I always enjoy this. As we know, there are certain things in a Moorcock book that you always enjoy. And one is them getting togged up. This is... Corum decided to wait until he discovered more before continuing to speculate. If he could reach Halwig van Neek and the Temple of Law, he might be able to contact Lord Arkin and seek his advice. He went to the room where he kept his arms and armour, and he drew on his silver byrnie, his silver greaves, and his conical silver helm, with the 3 characters set into it over the peak, characters which stood for his full name. And over all this he put his scarlet robe. Then he selected weapons, a bow, arrows, and a lance, a war axe of exquisite workmanship, and he buckled on his long, strong sword. Once again he garbed himself for war, and he made a magnificent and terrible figure, with his glittering 6-fingered hand and the jewelled patch which covered the jewelled eye of Rin. He had prayed that he would never have to dress himself thus again, that he would never have to use the alien hand grafted to his left wrist or peer through the eye into the fearsome netherworld to summon the living dead to his aid. Yet, in his heart, he had known that the powers of chaos had not been vanquished, that the worst was still to come. So, you know, Corum looks pretty swish, right? Scarlet robe, silver byrnie, conical helm, greaves, war axe, sword, bow, lance. But no, Jhary came in, and he too was dressed for travelling. Though he disdained armour, wearing a quilted leather jerkin stamped with the designs in gold and platinum in lieu of a breastplate, his only concession. His wide-brimmed hat was placed at a jaunty angle on his head. His long hair was brushed so that it shone and fell over his shoulders. He wore flamboyant silks and satins, elaborately decorated boots trimmed with red and white lace, and was the very picture of effete dandyism. Only the soldier's sword at his belt denied the impression. On his shoulder was the small black and white winged cat which was his constant companion. In his hand he held a bottle with a thin neck. A brownish liquid swirled inside. So Jhary rocks up with the miraculous potion, looking fucking super swish, as always, and they're geared up, and they got the goods, and we find out that although this stuff does take off the rage, it also gets them a bit mashed. And Corum's a little bit worried that if they do get into a fight, their senses might be a little bit dulled. So basically, probably what they've got there is, I don't know, an old blend of old Rocky and a nice stout or something. Yeah, settled them right down. Sorry, just have a swig of my black sheep snowflake.
I feel that's a world Moorcock knows about, right?
Yeah, I think so. And if I were to ever ask Moorcock a question, then I think his passion for details of sartorial elegance will definitely be high on that list. Sorry, I was just winking at Simon there. That's why there was a bit of a pause. No spoilers, though. So they fly
The
from
sound of
Castle
the wink
Iran.
won't come out.
Yeah. Yeah. So they fly from Castle Iran in their mission to save the land once more. But Whiskers has a plan of his own and flies away. And yes, for the second time, we get Whiskers on an adventure chapter, which made me very happy. I loved the Whiskers adventure in the last book. I thought it was fabulous. Whiskers is just a cool character. Just a cool character.
Yeah. But I think this cat is going to get like completely traumatized. Some of the things it has to witness.
Well, when it witnessed was it the bear god and the dog gods at the Mabden feast with all the torture and everything else last time around, that was pretty bad. But yeah, it's not so good this time either, is it? Really, you know, for a sensitive little kitty, I'm not sure she'd really be seeing these things. Yeah, it's pretty bad. So the little cat flew steadily throughout the day, changing its direction constantly as if it followed an invisible and winding path through the sky. Soon it had ceased to fly inland, hesitated, then headed out over the cliffs and over the sea, which it hated. Islands came in, because of course cats don't like water. Cats don't like open water. So poor Whiskers. You're a cat person, aren't you? You have cats.
I think Moorcock likes cats.
Yeah.
Because
do your cats have adventures?
Some of the descriptions, like I think there was something in the Queen of the Swords where they rescue some villagers, and there's a child in it. It said something like he stroked the cat, but the cat bore the assault with dignity or something.
Right,
seems like something a cat person would say. He's thinking about the cat's feelings.
Yeah. It definitely knows cats because there's a reference earlier on to Whiskers always being found sleeping in inconvenient places. So he's flying over the Nadrag Isle. Well, I say he. The little cat's always referred to as it. So we don't know. We don't know the gender of Whiskers.
No.
But there were the Nadrag Isles where lived the remainder of the folk who had become grovelling slaves of the Mabden in order to preserve their lives. Though presently released from that slavery, they had become so degenerate that their race might still die from apathy, for most could not even hate the Vadag now. The cat was searching for something, following a psychic rather than a physical scent, a scent which only he could distinguish. So it switches between he and it. Once before, the little cat followed a similar scent, when he had gone to Callanweir to witness the great massing of Mabden and the summoning of their now banished gods, the dog and the horned bear. This time, however, the cat was acting upon its own impulses. It had not been sent to the Nadrag Isles by Jhary or Canel, its master. In what was almost the exact centre of the group of green islands was the largest of them, called Malifal by the Nadrag. Like all the islands, it contained many ruins of towns, ruins of castles, ruins of villages. Some were ruins thanks to the passage of time, but others were ruins thanks to the passage of Mabden armies when they had attacked the Nadrag Isles at the height of King Lyra-Brod's power. It had been El Glandith and his Denladisi chariot warriors who had led these expeditions, just as later he had led expeditions to the Vadag castles and destroyed what was left of the Vadag race, save Corum, or so you had thought. The destruction of the two elder races, the Shefenhau, as Glandith called them, had taken a matter of a few years. They had been completely unprepared for Mabden attack, had not been able to believe in the power of creatures scarcely more intelligent or cultured than other beasts, so they had died. Yeah, I think the Vadag were a little bit too up their own arses, to be honest, because, you know, viewing man as little better than beast is in itself a racist trope, isn't it? So, I mean, I'm not saying they had it coming or anything like that, but it didn't really help their own cause, did they? And only a few Nadrag had been spared, used like dogs to hunt down their fellows, to search for their ancient Vadag enemies, to see into other dimensions and tell their masters what they perceived. These had been the least brave of their race, those who preferred degenerate slavery to death. The little cat saw some of their camps among the ruins of the towns. They had been returned here after the Battle of Halwig when their Mabden masters had been defeated. They had made no attempt to rebuild their castles or cities. Hark! I hear whiskers. I knew you were a cat guy. Yeah. So anyway.
He's adding audio ambience.
Yeah. The cat finds its way to Oos, and essentially we have Glandith and a Nadrag sorcerer who's been causing the mayhem that we've been seeing, a chaos spell called the Cloud of Contention. There is a lovely, lovely description of Glandith as well. It says, El Glandith's red acned face was half hidden by his huge beard, which had been braided and laced with ribbon, just as his long black hair was braided. His grey eyes hinted at an inner disease, just as his fat red lips suggested corrupted offal. Wonderful. His fat red lips suggested corrupted offal. What a description. Yeah, he looks pretty awful, obviously. So this Nadrag
He
sorcerer...
doesn't mention food in his beard this time.
No, it doesn't.
There's food in his beard and he's got grease all over him.
In many ways, that should be a suggestion of evil. But when I was a teenager, my mate Treble threw up once after going to chippy after the pub, and he had a chip in his beard for 3 days. So, I mean, I don't think Treble listens to this podcast. Trebs, if you ever listen to this podcast, I apologise for busting your cover. But yes, you did once have a bit of vomited, regurgitated chip in your beard for 3 days. And Treble, to be fair, isn't evil.
Was he a student at the time?
No. We forewent the whole student malarkey and just went straight to pack. I think, did we both pack in sixth form at the same time? Because we both I actually discovered some of my terrible habits through Trebs. Because, interesting story. It's not that interesting, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So Trebs lived in a house in Hull, down a street called Marlborough Ave. And when you went round his house, you rang the doorbell, his mum let you in. Then there was another doorbell button on the hallway wall. And they lived in this beautiful, beautiful semi-detached house in Hull. And she'd ring the bell to tell him, because he was at the top of the house on like the 3rd floor, his bedroom was the attic, that instead of having to shout, so she'd ring the bell and then he'd come downstairs, and then you would go back up to the top of the house where nobody went, none of the rest of the family went because it was too far up, and it was a den of iniquity, is all I'm going to say. It was his parents' house, but we got away with murder in there. And it was going round there one time when he and another old mate of mine were there, and they were up to no good. And that was my introduction to getting up to no good. And to cut a long story short, sixth form didn't last too much longer after that. And no, we didn't go to university. In fact, I think Treble just upped and disappeared to Portugal at one point with an acoustic guitar, and nobody heard from him again for ages. And I got a phone call from a private detective who'd been hired by his family to find him. And all I could tell him was, last I heard, he took his acoustic guitar to Portugal. He did come back, eventually. Yeah. Anyway, I'm telling Treble's life story here, so I'll stop. I'm not going to tell Treble's life story.
Well,
but Treble,
you need to get him on the podcast.
I do, really.
He can explain what he was up to.
Yeah. I mean, I do see him the odd time. I see him about once a year, and we go for a few beers in either Bradford or Halifax, and we catch up on old times. And he looks like he actually looks like a fantasy character himself, because he's now got a bald head like Smeagol Baldhead, and he's got a beard that comes down to a ginger beard all the way down to his waist. So he does look like something out of one of these books.
Oh, yeah.
To be honest, yeah.
But no chips in it.
No chips in his beard anymore. As far as I can tell. Not at least that I've observed. But I suppose my point was, going back to the beginning of this, having regurgitated or recently eaten food in your beard isn't in and of itself a sign of evil. I'll give Glandith a pass for that. Glandith is evil. We know he's evil. But acne and chips in your beard don't necessarily mean the same thing. Yeah. Anyway, Glandith is hanging around with this sorcerer called Ertil the sorcerer, and he's manifested the spell by calling on a chaos demon, who is a servant of Lord Mabelord, the King of the Swords, and in doing this, for every summoning he loses a year of his life. Well, loses or uses, I suppose, burns a year of his life, so he's not that keen on. But Glandith is insistent, bullies him into it, so he calls on a demon again via a rather distressing method, which poor Whiskers has to observe. So, what is this method?
Yeah, this was very troubling. I mean, was it more troubling than like cooking those people alive? I mean, in some ways, yes.
Yeah.
He gets a captive monkey and crucifies it, drugs it, crucifies it, and then the demon enters the dying or dead corpse of the monkey, and it's a very familiar name. It's Yurkun.
Yeah,
And
it's only bloody Yurkun.
Well, I think when I read this, I thought, oh, it's the same name, but I didn't think you were necessarily supposed to think it was the same character. But reading it now, I think he's not used that name for no reason. It's got to be him. So is it Yurkun after he was killed? Now Yurkun gets killed. Like, I'm forgetting the timeline, but I did actually try and look at publication order of all of his books today, and it's quite difficult to find out because every time you try and find out an order, they're just putting them into series or putting them into like a sort of canonical order.
Yeah,
I'm really, really interested in which order they were written originally and they were published originally. So yeah, as you say, like the next year he did Elric and Melniboné, which is the origin story, but he'd already written a bunch of other Elric stories. So does Yurkun die in the Dreamy City?
Yurkun dies in the Dreaming City, and at the point this is published, that's his only appearance in the Elric saga, because obviously in Elric of Melniboné, which is probably writing shortly after this, when he's on his 3-day speed benders of knocking books out in 3 days, probably still. If I ever get the chance to ask him a question, that's going to be one of my questions. Did you tell us the truth? Anyway, so yeah, Yurkun has only been in it once. He's been in the Dreaming City, defeated by Elric, now doomed to serve Mabelord as a servant of chaos, because of course Yurkun was bound to chaos, wasn't he? Like all Melnibonéans. So it makes sense that if he ends up going down as a result of Elric's bond with Ariok, and this bad magic and sorcery ends up consuming him, then sure, why not? This makes some kind of sense. But it is another example of how it's just the start of a few litterings of references and appearances in this book that only ramp up as the book goes on. Yeah. But he does offer Glandith a warning that if Glandith takes on additional power granted by chaos, he'll become more like what he hates. But Glandith don't care. Glandith just wants power, because he's a bad man. Chapter 5, The Deserted City. Some more quite disturbing imagery here, because they're flying over the land of Luamanesh, observing people killing each other along the way, including at one point women attacking women and children attacking children, which is quite a distressing image. Because we've always had, and he doesn't dwell on it, but we've always had plenty of imagery in the Moorcock books, particularly the Hawkmoon books, Europe being sacked by the Grand Britannians, pyramids of bodies and all that business. But there's something very specific about the people of Luamanesh, this what is effectively like normally in happier times, like a beautiful garden of a land. And the city of Halwig is the same, but the idea that in this land people are just attacking and killing each other, including children attacking children, is really quite a disturbing image. But again, he doesn't dwell on it. It's just there as background and the building of the scenario that they find themselves in. And I think it's another strength, I think, of this book, that it doesn't just devolve into quest mode really, really quickly. Right, you've got to go here and get this thing to do another thing. It's actually quite a traumatizing journey that he takes throughout all of this. But because it's written in such a breezy fashion, it in many ways is a light and easy read, but the subject matter is heavy, And the more you think about some of these lines that you just skim over, the heavier it gets. Yeah, it's good stuff, really. I think it's some of the best Eternal Champion storytelling, definitely.
In this period as well, would it be fair to, I've only just thought of this, but he's not really interested in giving you sympathetic villains. Like the villains are absolutely diabolical bastards throughout all the Elric stuff. I mean, he's written all the 4 Hawkmoon books at this point, and he writes all the Corum books in the same year. And you don't really get that thing that you see in a lot of fantasy, I guess, where it's like nuanced shades of grey and stuff. It's like they're fighting these people who are absolutely utter, vile, evil creatures. I mean, I think it's his heroes that are shaded, but there's never really any moral ambiguity about who they're up against, because the villains are just doing such despicable, awful things all the time.
Mm. And the powers that they call on are foul and odious and unpleasant. Right back to the
Yeah.
Knight of the Swords, the description of Ariok, the huge, bloated, greasy, hairy, fat demon that plucks people from his chest hairs and eats them. Powerful imagery, really, really powerful imagery. And probably more than plot, these books are imagery driven. Because if you try and, okay, in the second Corum trilogy, perhaps you get into a quite, I'm going to say it, tedious, repetitive quest and fetch quest system across the 3 books. In the Hawk Moon books, they're just sort of the Arabic questy, but they get a bit psychedelic at times with, sighing bridges or whatever it was. I can't remember. But all sorts of weird things, and mutant war Jaguars of Asia Communista and all this stuff. A lot of the pages are just descriptions of heavy metal album covers. And
yeah, absolutely.
It is just, it's very image driven, and I can see why. I mean, I was a massive metalhead when I was a teenager when I'm reading these things. And then later on, I went on to be a metalhead and a psychedelic dabbler and everything else. So all this stuff appeals, not because it's like, Jesus, that was a really fucking fascinating story, and oh, what a climax, and oh, what an arc this character. No, it's just crazy fucking imagery. Feed me more, feed me more of this stuff. Yeah, and this is Moorcock, great writer, and when he commits himself to writing a story, like let's get into his literary period. I feel dirty saying it. So once he gets past his pure fantasy schlock genre fiction and gets into his literary fiction, yes, he can write excellent stories, he can write excellent characters, but you know what, at this point he's just creating crazy vistas and crazy scenes, and now he's tying all this stuff together, and it's creating a network that I loved when I was 15, and I'm reading it again now. I think this is probably the first time I've read The King of the Swords, maybe in 25 years. Maybe have I ever read it a second time since I read it as a teenager? I honestly couldn't say. I probably have at some point. Probably read it in the 90s, I guess. But, it's incredibly rewarding. If you're invested in this style of storytelling and you're invested in these stories particularly, this is all super rewarding.
The sort of imagery, and you go from one sort of arresting, amazing sort of diorama to the next. That just talking about it now, it reminds me of the Narnia books. And like one thing he has in common with, I mean, these books have in common with Narnia. I remember I reading them a few years back and thinking, I don't really think much of the stories here, but the imagery and the kind of the dreamlike here's a new I think it was particularly like the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where they one episode is on this island and then they go to another island. And it's a bit like Gulliver's Travels, I suppose. And there's a crazy thing happening on this island, and it's it's just like someone's dreamed up an amazing image. It doesn't really make that much sense or kind of tie all together, but it's about the ride and the imagery that's being created along the way. And I'm sure he wasn't necessarily being influenced by Narnia, and I don't think he'd thank you for the comparison, but that's what it made me think of.
Yeah, maybe not, but I mean, he was a voracious reader.
Sure,
and
yeah.
I'm sure he probably did read these things. And you know what? Even when we read stuff that we're not particularly into because of its, I don't know, spiritual context or whatever it is sometimes that turns us off about something, there are still things in there inevitably that if we appreciate them are going to have some kind of impact on us. I haven't read the Narnia books since I was probably 12 or 13, and I never read them all. I read, obviously, Red Lion, The Witch in the Wardrobe, read Prince Caspian, read Dawn Treader. I think I might have read The Silver Chair, maybe, but I certainly didn't read them all. But yeah, really, really strong on imagery. The whole image of the death of Aslan is really quite grim and disturbing, especially for a child reader.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely great stuff, and just simple stuff as well, like Is it a mouse with a rapier wearing a pretty jacket in Voyage of the Dawn Treader?
Right, yeah.
So, some of this stuff, comes close to the type of stuff that Moorcock would litter some of his more frivolous and, City in the Autumn Stars has got Reynard the Fox in it. I can't remember which one it was that we read not so long. It was Fortress of the Pearl, where you've got a bear in a bottle green knitted jacket or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's really proud of. Yeah, I love that stuff. I love all that stuff. In fact, when I ran Black Sword Hack for some of the patrons last year, I had to put in a lion wearing a bottle green knitted suit. And where does the influence for that come from? It probably comes subconsciously from a blend of Aslan and Moorcock putting, anthropomorphized animals in weird clobber, Oh yeah, I took great pleasure in doing that. I enjoyed it very much.
It's in the Night of the Swords. I think Shul appears at one point as a bear wearing a natty hat as well.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, of course. I forgot.
For no
about
good
that.
reason.
For every good reason, because it's cool.
I mean, if you could do that, why would you not do that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think character, just like incidental characters like Mr. Tum. Well, no, actually, Tumnus isn't an incidental character. Tumnus is quite an important character, isn't he? But you could slot Mr. Tumnus in any of a dozen Moorcock novels and not bat an eyelid, and have him fit perfectly. Anyway, we've got to get through this book at some point, haven't we? Oh my God, should we do C.S. Lewis at some point? Oh, there's an idea. Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe. What weird coincidence. I've got a Turkish Delight in front of me. Oh, what?
That is weird.
Oh, maybe this is a sign. Yeah, maybe this is a sign. Anyway, in the deserted city of Alnwick, they only find one living soul. The priest Illyrian in the Temple of Lorn is a bit worse for wear. He's had an eye gouged out. He's had an eye gouged out. And he's pretty shirty. But after a dose of Jhary's medicine, he comes round a bit and agrees to try and summon Lord Arkin. I mean, seriously, if we think about how pretty relaxed this lot have been in terms of, having conquered Queen Zionbarg and Ariok and got rid of them from certain planes, where the fuck has Lord Arkin been while this is going on? He's obviously got his back turned, hasn't he? But Whiskers returns, fills Jhary in on his sortie, and tips him off. And he just said that Whiskers is a little bit, anxious when he's giving Jhary his download, which is not surprising in the slightest. But he also tells Jhary that Glandith has new chaos creatures as allies, and they're on the way. Black shadows flying from the east, flying low, flying purposefully, huge wings beating, strange cries sounding in the evening air, cries which were fierce and yet full of melancholy, the cries of damned souls, yet these were beasts, long-necked beasts whose heads writhed at the end of their stalks, staring this way and that, scanning the ground as hawks might scan for prey. Long, thin heads with long, thin fangs projecting from their red mouths, blank, miserable eyes, despairing voices, cawing as if pleading for release. And on their black, broad backs were strapped the wheelless chariots of the Denladisi, and in these hastily fashioned howdahs were the Mabden murderers themselves, and in the leading one stood a figure in a horned helm with a great iron sword in his hand. And they thought they could hear his laughter, though it must be another sound, perhaps a sound from the monstrous black flying things. Anyway, Corum thinks, oh, it's all right, I'll just use the eye of Rill, hand of Rill, eye of the eye. But it don't work. It's lost its lustre, and it won't even lift off his eye socket, so he can't look into the other realm and summon the last lot of people that he defeated to come and fight his battle for him. Basically, they have to scram. Again, like the Queen of the Swords before it, there's lots of spare yet bafflingly evocative detail about how shit and brutal things have got for the poor inhabitants of this world, and now, even when they're trying to escape, they've got Glandith right on their tails. But they run back through the streets to the Temple of Law. Illyrian has managed to make contact with Arkin, but he's not a whole lot of help, although he does explain why perhaps he might have turned his back on this plane. He's pretty busy, to be fair, and he helpfully explains that the forces of Law are fighting chaos across 10 of the 15 planes. but he suggests they flee and try to reach Tanalorn. Oh, Tanalorn. Our first mention of Tanalorn, I think, in the Corum stories. So once again, things are starting to thicken up when it comes to the references and the crossovers. We've had Yerkun, now we've got Tanalorn. There'll be more to come later on when someone refers to Jhary as Timoras. Timoras is a character who was in the short story to rescue Tanalorn, who assists Rakia the Red Archer. So again, you know, you're reading this stuff in 1971 and all these things are coming thick and fast, tying all this together. And it's all getting like the Moorcock's pulling these drawstrings and pulling at all these things. And these, until now, these intertextual elements of Moorcock's fantasy stories, again, have been limited to those references in italics in books like The Eternal Champion. But it's all starting to come together now. But I did think when I was reading this, and I didn't have time to go back and check, was the warrior in jet and gold in an earlier Corum book?
He's in Hawkmoon,
Yeah.
right? But I don't think he's appeared before in these.
Yeah, maybe not. I just couldn't remember because
I mean, just
so
imagine
confused.
there's someone out there who knows all this stuff off the top of their head.
Yeah,
but there's so much of it.
Yeah. I can't remember what I had for tea 2 nights ago. So I'm absolutely the last person in the world to be any kind of authority in all this stuff. But yeah. So, yeah, again, we've got this. We're starting to build the foundations now for this big arc that moves on and up through. I mean, the second Corum trilogy, not so much. You know, Gainer the Damned comes back in that, and there are a couple more references about Gainer and his role in all of this. But it's really the Elric stories that he's writing in between 71 and 75, and the second Hawkmoon sequence with Castle Brass. Yeah, Castle Brass, Count Brass. Yeah, one or the other. Champion of Garethorn and the Quest for Tanalorn, where he makes his first attempt to put some kind of blueprint to it all. And then, I mean, there's much more to come in this. He's going to put his foot down on that blueprint in the second half of this book. But kind of tie it all up in a bow in the Quest for Tanalorn, which I think was his first attempt to make some kind of unified conclusion to all of this. But it won't be his last, of course, because with the Dragon on the Sword, he ties Von Beck and Ericos together with John Dacre. And then, of course, even as recently as 10 years ago, a little bit more, he's writing the Moonbeam Roads trilogy, which has an entirely different conclusion to the whole John Dacre business, tying in Elric and everything else. So, yeah, it was his first attempt, I think, you know. But it is amazing to think that he's had, up until now, like a 65-odd-year career of writing books. And with this, he's 10 years in. He's only 10 years in at this point. Oh, amazing, really.
Was he trying to put it to bed with Quest for Tanalorn?
I think he was, yeah. Yeah, I absolutely think he was. I think he was putting it to bed. He wants to move on to different things. He's going to go on. He's going to write The Condition of Muzak, which kind of does a sort of similar thing with some of the concepts in there about the Jhary Cornelius characters and how that world exists. And then he's writing things like Gloriana, you know, and he's writing The City in the Autumn Stars. I can't remember what year that was written, but between Gloriana and City in the Autumn Stars, almost its entire writing style changes. You know, he's writing 350 page, closer to epic is the wrong word, but much more substantial in terms of plotting and character and incident. Although, you know, City in the Autumn Stars is very travelogue-y in places, but it's a lot more dense. You know, it's a lot more dense and textured, that stuff. And then by the 80s, he's starting on his Colonel Pyatt novels. He's writing Mother London. He's writing a lot of other fiction like King of the City and stuff like that. So, yeah. And then, of course, in the 80s, he'll come back to Elric and write Fortress of the Pearl, which, again, is a completely different style of writing. Yeah. Which I think we've commented it before on the podcast. If you were to read Elric collections in order and go Elric of Melniboné, Fortress of the Pearl, Sailor on the Seas of Fate, and then Weird of the White Wolf, which is stories from the 60s collected, there's a lot of, you know, the shifts in
Whiplash.
style, are so stark. Yeah,
So
yeah.
was it the Dancers at the End of Time was like sort of late 70s or like 1980 kind of time? Was
70s.
that was definitely after this.
Yeah, after this, but still 70s. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's getting into a little bit of, I don't know, is whimsy the right word? Certainly more whimsical and more playful.
Yeah.
In those
Getting away from the
terms.
heroic fantasy
Yeah.
stuff and into a bit more just experimental, just surreal.
Mm. And if we think that at this stage we have got a lot of these hints, well, we're into book 2 now, and he just puts his foot down on it all. So they're aboard their sky ship, Corum, Relina, Jhary, and Whiskers. They've escaped that plane to try, because they've decided they're going to try and find Tantalon. Jhary can pilot the sky ship, and by manipulating the crystals, can move them between the planes, and they find themselves in a featureless plane that Jhary surmises may be a realm of balance. And then they observe 3 strange scenes, as if on a vast theatre stage. And this is where we really start to kick into quite an interesting gear. Anyway, it says, this is what they saw then. All was huge, but in proportion. A rider spurring his horse across a desert between a white and purple sky. The rider had milk-white hair, and it streamed behind him. His eyes were red and full of wild bitterness. His skin was bone-white. Physically, he somewhat resembled the Vadag, for he had the same unhuman face. He was an albino, clothed all in black, baroque armour, every part of it covered in fine, detailed metalwork, a huge helm upon his head, a black sword at his side. So this is the point where Moorcock he's writing out all the goofy clobber that Elric used to wear in the early 60s, and he's getting to be a proper Doom master now. It says, now the rider was no longer upon a horse. He rode a beast that somewhat resembled those which had pursued them. A flying beast, a dragon. The black sword was in his hand, and it gave off a strange black radiance. The rider rode the dragon as if it were a horse, seated in a saddle, his feet in stirrups, but he was strapped to the saddle to save him falling. He was crying out. Oh, this all sounds really fucking familiar, doesn't it? And below him were other dragons, evidently brothers to the one he rode. They were engaged in aerial battles with misshapen things with the jaws of whales. A green mist drifted across the scene and obscured it. Now they saw the asymmetrical outlines of a gigantic castle, flowing upwards to form its shape even as they watched. Battlements, turrets, towers all appeared. The dragon rider ordered his beasts towards it, and they released flaming venom from their mouths, directing it at the castle. A few others who followed the rider also sat upon the backs of the dragons. They passed the blazing castle and came now to an undulating plain. Upon this plain stood all the demons and corrupt warped things of chaos, arranged as if for battle. And here too were gods, dukes of hell every one, Malowin, Zionbarg, Zortra, and more, Shadros the Reaper, with monstrous hairless head and sweeping scythe, and the oldest of the gods, Slaughter the Old, slender and lovely as a youth of 16. And it was this massed might that the dragon riders attacked. Surely they must perish. Fiery venom splashed across the scene, and again there was only golden light. So Jhary, Jhary knows what he's seeing. Corum's not sure what's going on here, but Jhary knows what he's seeing, because he says, the greatest battle between law and chaos, gods and mortals I have ever witnessed. The white-faced one I served in a different guise. He is called Elric of Melniboné. He is like you, a champion chosen by destiny to fight, so that the equilibrium of the cosmic balance might be preserved. And there's quite a melancholy bit. It said, I remember his friend Moonglum, but his friend Moonglum does not remember me. Oh. And then another scene unfolds before them. A horseman in bulky armour rode from a camp towards the black and white walls of a city. He carried a banner and seemed to come to parley. He called up at the walls, and eventually a gate opened to admit him. The watchers could not see his face. The scene changed again. Now, strangely, the one who had been attacking the walls was defending it. Sudden glimpses of terrible massacres. Humans were being destroyed by weapons even more powerful than those possessed by the folks of Gulas Korgiris, and it was of their own kind, one of their own kind, who directed their murder. It was gone, golden, pure light returned. And just in case readers can't figure this one out, Jhary goes, Ericos. And then we have a new scene, the face of a man racked with pain, covered in sweat, a dark throbbing jewel embedded in his forehead. He drew down over his face a helm of such highly polished metal that it became a perfect mirror. In the mirror could be seen a group of riders who at first appeared to be men with the heads of beasts. Then it became plain that those heads were in fact helmets fashioned to resemble pigs, goats, bulls, and dogs. There was a pitched battle. There were several riders in the same polished helms. They were greatly outnumbered by their enemies in the beast masks. One of those in the mirror helmets, perhaps the man they had first seen, held something aloft, a short staff from which pulsed many coloured rays. The staff struck fear into the beast riders, and many had to be driven on by their leaders. The fight continued. The scene vanished to be replaced once more by nothing but the pure golden light. Once again, Jhary's on hand to say, Hawkmoon, the rune staff. So, thanks, Jhary, just in case we'd missed out on that one. But even then, I'm guessing, had you not read all of these other stories but had been dimly aware of them, then okay, you're going to read these things and go, ooh, I better go read that now. So, yeah, bit of clever self-marketing going on here as well. I mean, I think some of it is a little bit direct, a little bit broad, perhaps lacking in some kind of subtlety somewhere along the line.
Well, people would call it fan service now, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
through an Elric, just for likes. But when I read this, I'd not read any Hawkmoon, you know, and I was mostly reading these in sequence, and that was in the 80s. But you can imagine back in the 70s, people not even, you know, this might have been someone's first Moorcock book, and then they might have. I bet it wasn't that easy to get hold of all of these because you know, at this stage there's 4 Hawkmoon books, there's 3 Corum books, there's a couple of Elric books, and there's 2 Ericos. Like, that's a lot. You know, so you can imagine. I mean, I always think like comics. Like, comics are always sort of written from the proposition that every comic is someone's first, and you can't necessarily think that, you know, they've read every single one leading up to that. So you get some stuff explained to you, you get some stuff you understand, there's some stuff you can work out for yourself, there's some stuff that will make no sense, but you know that there's something else going on that you're missing out on, you know, and that must, you know, for people reading this at the time and subsequently, you know, no Amazon, so you can't necessarily get hold of all the books. And like, maybe your friend has read something that you haven't, you know, it sets your imagination on fire, doesn't it? Yeah. I don't know everything. This is giving me some of the story. I know there's tons more out there. Yeah, and it's smart. It's, you know, it's like anyone reading this back then would have been like, I've got to read all this other stuff to find out what the hell is going on. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, when you're picking up the Mayflower edition of this, for example, in 1971. You look at it, and in the, you know, 2 leaves in, you've got also by Michael Moorcock in Mayflower, and you're going to have Stormbringer, the Singing Citadel, the Sleeping Sorceress. You're going to have all 4 Hawkmoon books. You're going to have the first 2 Corum books. Then you're going to have all these other things like the Black Corridor and the Winds of Limbo. All these other books, and even in 1971. When you look at the also in Mayflower, also by Michael Moorcock, are also in Mayflower, there's probably going to be 25 or 30 books there. And now you're reading. I mean, if you pick this up at your uncle's house and you've never read anything else by Moorcock, and you just read this and this alone, there's going to be 2 things going on. One is I ain't got a fucking clue what's happening in terms of plot, but it doesn't matter, because it's all imagery driven. And when we get to this point where they're seeing these scenes of these other exciting, interesting sounding hero archetypes that are all part of this, and we'll find out in a couple of chapters' time, we'll actually get Jhary referring to Corum as an aspect of the Champion Eternal. You know, all of a sudden, I mean, we've had a novel called The Eternal Champion, obviously, but that at that point in time, if you're a casual reader of this stuff, just refers to the Ericos character, because we know that Ericos is really John Dacre, and John Dacre has been called, we know that from the beginning of the book, to fight in various places and various guises, and he has all his memories. But now we're actually blowing this wide open and saying, instead of just these tiny hints, there's this broad cosmology that's starting to emerge from all of this now. And yeah, incredibly exciting stuff for, you know, not only a 17-year-old reading this in 1971, but my granddad was in his 50s when he's reading this in the 1970s, and he's loving it as well and passing them all down to me by the 1980s. And my uncles are the same. My uncles are in their 30s and 40s when they're reading all this stuff. Yeah, and it's just, it appeals to people on a number of levels, I think. And when I was reading these in the 80s, yeah, fuck it, I was gasping at the connections and the overlaps and going, oh my God, this is mind-blowingly brilliant. You know, maybe I wasn't particularly sophisticated. I don't know, but yeah, it fucking worked for me. And it still works for me now. But it's kind of old hat now, isn't it? Because every fucker's doing it. To me at the time, and I'm sure to lots of other readers, it was serious business and mind-blowing in its own way. Just like it's serious business and mind-blowing, I suppose, for a 13-year-old who's watching Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness or WandaVision or any of these things, because it's big business now, not just in all the Marvel film tap that's been around for a while now, but even Stephen King went down a similar track, didn't he, with his from Following the Dark Tower?
Yeah.
Now, I've not read I've barely read any Stephen King, but I'm dimly aware of the fact that he started to tie all these things together, and you know, The Shining is now part of a broader Stephen Kingiverse or whatever. I think there's probably a name for it if you're a Stephen King fan. I'm sorry, Stephen King fans. I read The Stand. I got to the end. That fucking ending put me off ever reading any more Stephen King books. So I will not waste my time reading an 800-page book that ends with the literal hand of God saving the day. Nah, fuck that. But I understand perfectly that people really dig it.
There's
the TV series of The Stand.
Which I'm absolutely blanking the name of.
The Stand?
They're
no, you mean the interconnected Stephen King thing?
Yeah.
Yes, there is.
Set around a town.
Yeah, and it's only been around the last couple of years. It's come out, hasn't it? Is it Castle Rock? Or is Castle Rock the name of an old VHS video label?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. It's something like that.
Well, both, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It is Castle Rock, is it? Oh, right, okay. Yeah. I mean, funny enough, around the time this was published, Philip Jose Farmer was kicking off his World Newton books as well. He did a novel called Tarzan Alive, where he turns Tarzan, Doc Savage, Phileas Fogg, certain elements from H. Rider Haggard novels, and draws them into a shared world, which I think someone else later tagged the World Newton family, but I'm not sure if Philip Jose Farmer ever actually used that. But that connecting the dots approach, you know, it's intriguing stuff, isn't it? Alan Moore did it with League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where you flip through the pages of that, and it's not just the story, it's not just the characters, it's just characters in frames where you can go through to the point where Jess Nevins did all of his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen companions, where you could read through it panel by panel and read all of his commentary on the panels and find out just how fucking obscure and weird some of the references in there were. I mean, I know it's not exactly the same thing, but it is. If you can do that stuff with established literary characters that are in the public domain and make it interesting, Moorcock's 10 years into his career and he's written so many fucking books that he's doing it with all his own intellectual property and making people react in the same way. Yeah. And he was just a bloody bairn at the time still, really. He's only 30-odd when he's writing this stuff, but he's just restlessly brimming with ideas and creativity. Oh, incredible.
I wonder how much of it came from him realising that, like, you're writing heroic fantasy and you know that there's tropes and you know there's a formula and, like, making a thing of the fact that, well, these are all essentially the same character. You know, he's aware of that, and he uses that to actually build on, like, way more than just a sword and sorcery book.
Yeah.
There's a market for this stuff. I can produce it, but I'm going to do something interesting with it. I'm going to do something that's going to fire my intellectual curiosity as well as the readers, you know, because I know I can do it. You know, he wrote Sojam the Swordsman, and then he writes Elric, and, you know, there's all these variations and kind of like reflections that obviously were occurring to him as he was writing each one. And I think in an interview he's saying, I'm always thinking 10 books ahead, so I want to write the book, you know, that's 10 books away, but I'm always putting in references and like almost like clues to what I'm going to be writing later on.
I guess when you're writing at the sheer pace of his output in the 60s and 70s, you know, I guess you have to be like that, don't you? Otherwise, if you're navel gazing when you're writing something and concentrating just on what's in front of you, you end up writing the book for, like everybody else does, taking a year to write a book. whereas he's bashing these things out at an industrial pace. Incredible, really. But anyway, chapter 2 of book 2, Castle Built of Blood. Literally a castle built of blood, because it's the castle of boar-headed minor chaos deity Duke Tyr. And he explains himself. You have not heard of Tyr's castle? How strange. Why, my pretty mortal, it is built of blood. Weirdly, when I was reading this a couple of days ago, I was reading Duke Tyr's dialogue in the voice of a Nicolas Cage yuppie character from the late 80s or early 90s, like Vampire's Kiss. And I don't know why. And I'm not going to try and duplicate it because I'll make a fool of myself. You have not heard of Tyr's castle? How strange. Why, my pretty mortal, is built of blood. All of blood. Many thousands have died to make my castle. I must slay many thousands more before it is properly completed. Blood, my dear, blood and blood and blood. Can you not sniff its delicious tang? What you sniff is blood. What you see is all blood. Mortal blood, immortal blood. It all mingles. This is why I was thinking of Nicolas Cage in Vampire's Kiss, because I was expecting him to start going A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. But I said I was not going to do it and make a fool of myself, but I did go ahead and make a fool of myself. So yeah, he has literally got a castle made of blood. And Jhary and Corum, they try to fool Tyr into thinking they're on the side of chaos, but Rowena fucks it up by puking up at the stench of Duke Tyr, which means they can't possibly be chaos aligned. So he declares that they can leave in exchange for all of her blood, which they're not really into. Whether she leaves a chip in her beard after throwing up, I'm not entirely sure. But it doesn't work anyway. So they decide to draw their swords, whereupon Duke Tyr burst into grunting laughter that was once mocking and incredulous. Because he thinks it's crazy that they would draw swords with him. But he turns out to be a bit of a mug, because they appeal to him to let him leave, with Rowena and Glandith and his flying serpent gang find their way into this plane. So Jhary tells him a fib that the flying gang are Corum and his mates, so Mabelard will be well chuffed if Teal gets them. So Teal runs off to grab his nets and sets about them, which is quite handy. It does make me really, really happy, this Duke Teal chapter, or 2 chapters, because Moorcock does have a habit of occasionally just dropping in a random Duke of Hell or monster of the moment. And I like Duke Teal. I think he's a good one.
He really loves his castle.
Yeah, he does.
He's very proud.
There is at one point where he's talking about Rowena. He says, simply give me the female. Keep the flesh and bones if you desire. All I require is the blood. Yeah, brilliant. It made me very happy. And as short-lived Duke of Chaos encounters go, it was a good one. And even without the silly accent I gave him in my head, I quite enjoyed Teal. But while Teal is distracted, Jhary is determined to get the skyship moving between the planes again. And he does, but they all get separated. And Corum has an interesting interlude in a very sedate town, which the book all of a sudden takes its time to slow down for a few pages, because it's been barreling along at quite some pace to this point. And he ends up in this sedate little town, subject to the ministrations of a fat doctor and his fat wife. And they feed him, they take a keen interest in him, and it turns out that when Corum crash-landed in this plane, alongside a few bits of wreckage and no Rowena and no Jhary, he was taken to this doctor who's taken a keen interest in Corum because he's a creator of prosthetics for people with serious injuries. But Corum can't understand their language, so they're attempting to communicate and, managing just about. And I really like this section. It takes its time, it builds a nice picture of a civilised, pleasant place. But after a couple of days convalescing, the doctor gets into an argument about Corum with a dude in robes who can only be a priest or something. So obviously he's going to be some kind of dodgy twat. So Corum decides to get his gear together and make himself scarce. But it doesn't quite go according to plan, because things take a peculiar turn. Yeah. He woke at dawn and peered down into the street. This seemed to be the main street of the city, and it was already alive with tradesmen and others, some with donkeys or horses, others with handcarts calling out greetings to each other. He smelled fresh bread and began to feel hungry, but curbed his impulse when a baker's cart stopped immediately beneath him to sneak out and steal a loaf. He dozed again. When it was night, he would try to find a horse and leave the city behind him, seek other towns where there might be news of Rowena or Jhary. Towards midday, he heard a great deal of cheering in the street as he edged his way to the window. There were flags waving and a band of some sort was playing raucous music. A procession was marching through the streets, a martial procession by the look of it, for many of the riders were undoubtedly warriors in their steel breastplates and with their swords and lances. In the middle of the procession, hardly acknowledging the crowd's cheers, was the man who was the object of their celebration. He rode a big yellow horse, and he wore a high-coloured red cloak which at first hid his face from Corum. There was a hat on his head, a sword at his side. He was frowning a little. Then Corum saw with mild surprise that the man's left hand was missing. He clutched his reins in a specially made hook device. The warrior turned his head, and Corum was this time completely astonished. He gasped, for the man on the yellow horse had an eye patch over his right eye, and though his face was of the Mabden cast, he bore a strong resemblance to Corum. Corum stood up, about to cry out to the man who was almost his double, but then he felt a hand close over his mouth and strong arms bear him down to the floor. He wrenched his head about to see who attacked him. His eyes widened. "Jhary," he said, "so you are on this plane. And Rowena, have you seen her?" The dandy, who was dressed in the clothes of the local inhabitants, shook his head. "I have not. I had hoped that you and she stayed together. You have made yourself conspicuous here, I gather." "Do you know this plane?" "I know it vaguely, and I can speak one or two of the languages." "And the man on the yellow horse, who is he?" "He is the reason why you should leave here as soon as possible. He is yourself, Corum. He is your incarnation on this plane in this age, and it goes against all the laws of the cosmos that you and he should occupy the same plane at the same time. We are in great danger, Corum, but these folk could also be in danger if we continue, however unwittingly, to disrupt the order, the very balance of the multiverse." More hints as to the nature of Corum, which, in Corum's defence, if this was Elric would be going, "No, I do not accept this." Corum takes it quite well, I think.
Yeah, it becomes explicit. This is Earth, isn't it? This is here.
Yeah, this is as close as we get to it actually being part of our world, because later in the chapter, or the next chapter, Jhary suggests that this is a version of Cornwall, or Cairnow, as he refers to it, that's close to the history of our own. And we'll find shortly, there's a quick scrap. Jhary tells Corum that this priest guy who fell out with the doctor is looking for him so they can burn him at the stake. So what do they know? Why? Is it because he's some kind of blasphemous presence? We don't really find out, because as soon as the priest turns up, Corum stabs him through the neck, and the run through him and his heavies, grab some horses and escape. But Jhary suggests a course of action. They should find Lady Jane Pentalion in the village of Warlagon, and is in exposition mode now, and Mike is motoring down the track and drawing the threads together. There's a lot more exposition, which I don't think we'll go into in a great deal of detail, but Jhary says, "It's like Leowinesh, divided into a number of lands under the dominion of one monarch. This one is called Cairnow, or Cornwall, depending on whether you speak the language of the region or the language of the realm as a whole. It's a superstition-ridden land, though its traditions go back further than most of the parts of the country of which it is part, and you will find much of it like your own Bron Vadag. Its memories stretch back longer than do the memories of the rest of the realm. The memories have darkened, but they still have partial legends of a people like yourself who once lived here." So there's some more back and forth about whether this is perhaps Corum's future, but it says, it's a future, maybe not your future. Whiskers, turns out, has been under Jhary's shirt this entire time and comes out to sit on his shoulder. Corum's interested in how he knows so much of the plane, but of course, Jhary, he's a mysterious guy. But he does say at one point, he says, "Because I dwell here even now, there is really no such thing as time, you see. I remember what to you is the future. I remember one of my many incarnations. If you'd watched the parade longer, you would have seen not only yourself, but myself. I am called by some grand title here, but I serve the one you saw on the yellow horse. He was born in that city we have left, and he is reckoned a great soldier by these people, though, like you, I think he would prefer peace to war. That is the fate of the champion eternal." So it's all starting to unfold. And they make their way, eventually, to the house of Lady Jane Pentalion. And again, we find out that this is about as close to our world as we can possibly get, particularly when we get to Lady Jane Pentalion's stories, because she talks about wanting to be Guinevere or Isolde, and all of her thoughts of her youth and her fantasies. But the first page of that chapter is quite revealing because she refers to him as elf folk. Jhary says that the Vadag race, or their kin, the Eldrin, who are not greatly different save for the eyes, just as the Melnibonéans and the Nilanrians are offshoots of the same race, in this land they are sometimes known simply as elves, sometimes as devils, jinns, or even gods, depending on the region. So that whole debate that you sometimes get in Moorcock circles where it's like, well, Melnibonéans are just elves. This is Moorcock directly addressing it. So, well, yeah, after a fashion, not Tolkien elves, Cornwall elves, because that's cooler. Yeah.
And that the Nilanrians, like, is that referenced anywhere else? That really jumped out to me because obviously we know the Eldrin, we know the Vadag, we know the Melnibonéans, but is that just he's just thrown an extra one in there, or is that something that comes back? I didn't recognise that.
I think I took it as when she tells the tale, which, to summarise, she tells a very long tale where she says when she was a girl, she was dreaming of being Guinevere or Isolde. But in summary, it says an Egyptian tribe were passing, which I think we take to mean gypsies or Romany. And she and a gypsy girl that she made friends with managed to summon a demon, an elf called Jhary, from another world, but of the same general race as Corum. And I think that's who the Neralrians are. I think that's a reference to Geraint's race, or Geraint, who's a warrior from a mid-rank noble house of a similar race to the Vadag or the Melnibonéans. But they couldn't get him back, or her gypsy friend didn't want to, because they were both in love with him to some degree. And after Jane fell in love with him and he with her jealous friend summons 3 demons, trolls, who get into the house and cut him to pieces. It's quite stark in the way that that's actually described. He comes into the house and these trolls cut him to pieces, which is a bit of a bummer. Very Poul Anderson, very broken sword in tone, all this part. But yeah, this big tragedy in the life of Lady Jane. And since then, she's dedicated herself to learning of the different planes of existence in the hope of perhaps finding Geraint's world and people. So I think they are the I've fucking forgotten already. Let me reference it. What was it?
The three devils that kill
the
him.
Nilanrians, yeah, sorry. Yeah, the 3 devils.
They are I took them to be the Nadrag, or like the nearest thing to Nadrag, because she said those folk were related, and that sort of made the Nadrag make more sense to me, because I always remember thinking I didn't understand really what they were, because if they were related to the Vadag, which we're told at the beginning, I would have thought they'd be sort of elvish. They'd be like dark elves or something.
Yeah.
But for them to be these sort of troll, like, hairy, devilish characters, that it actually sort of makes the whole thing make sense for me, because when they say elves or gods, and it's like in folklore, a troll or a goblin or a ghost, they're all sort of interchangeable, so these sort of creatures from the spirit world, there's the kind of nice ones, the pretty ones, and there's I mean, they're like Morlocks, aren't they? But
yeah,
it really did sort of make a bit more sense, because when he did the physical description of the Nadrag, I could never get my head around why they were like that. But I think this sort of ties it together.
Yeah, I think you're right. He always described them as like flat-headed, low-browed, almost, hunched, hairy. Yeah.
Yeah, no nose but nostrils, sort of on a flat face and that sort of thing.
That would tally, wouldn't it? It's funny because even in Tolkien, orcs are descended from elves, aren't they? So you've still got that same lineage thing going on. They're more closely related than elves are to men, for example. They're of the same family tree, but the looks are markedly different. Yeah, those trolls could well have been Nadrag. Yeah, absolutely. This did feel very Broken Sword in tone, this piece, as well, because, the Broken Sword is a mythical version of our world as well, with elves. And is it trolls in the Broken Sword? It's 5 years since I've read it. I can't actually remember.
I believe so.
Lady Jane has had this big tragedy in her life. So now they've got a common interest because, of course, Corum and Jhary need to move again between the worlds. And she thinks she knows someone who could help. She says, I know of one who can put you on the road which leads to the achievement of that desire, but he can do no more. A sorcerer? Of sorts, he, like you, is not of this age. Like you, he seeks constantly to return to his own world. He can move easily through the few centuries bordering this time, but he seeks to travel many millennia, and that he cannot do. Is his name Baloriag? Said Jhary suddenly. An old man with a withered leg? Jhary being a smart ass, as always. You describe the man, but to us he is known merely as the Friar, for he is inclined to wear clerical garb since this offers him the greatest protection in the periods of history he visits. It is Baloriag, said Jhary, another lost one. There are few such souls who are whisked about the multiverse in this manner. Sometimes they are not at fault at all, but have been plucked willy-nilly by whatever winds they are which blow through the dimensions. Others, like Baloriag, are experimenters, sorcerers, scientists, scholars, call them what you will, who have understood something of the nature of time and space, but not enough to protect themselves. They too find themselves blown by those winds. There are also, as you know, ones like me who appear to be natural dwellers in the whole multiverse, or there are heroes like yourself, Corum, who are doomed to move from age to age and plane to plane, from identity to identity, fighting for the cause of law. And there are women of a certain sort like yourself, Lady Jane, who love these heroes, and there are malicious ones who hate them. What object there is to the myriad of existences I do not know, and it's probably better that we know nothing of them. Lady Jane nodded gravely. I think you're right, Sir Jhary, for the more one discovers, the less point there seems in life at all. However, we are concerned not with philosophy, but with immediate problems. I have sent out a summoning for the Friar, and hope that he hears it and comes. It is not always the case. Meanwhile, I have a gift for you, Prince Corum, for I feel it may be useful to you. It appears there is a mighty conjunction about to take place in the multiverse, when for a moment in time all ages and all planes will meet. I have never heard of such a thing before. That is part of my gift, the information. The other part is this. From a thong round her neck she now drew out a slender object, which though of a milky white colour also sparkled with every colour in the spectrum. It was a knife carved of a crystal which Corum had never seen before. She inclined her head to remove the thong. It is the witch knife which brought Jhary to me. It will, I think, bring aid to you when you need it greatly. It will call your brother to you. Oh, what could they be referring to there, I wonder? My brother, I have no. I was told this, she said, and I can add nothing to it, but here is the witch knife. Please take it. Corum accepted it and placed the thong around his own neck. Thank you, lady. Another will tell you when and how to use it, she said, and now, gentlemen, will you rest here at the manor in the forest until such time as the Friar may present himself to us? We would be honoured, said Corum. But tell me, lady, if you know anything of the woman I love, for we are separated. I speak of the Lady Rowena of Alamglil, and I fear much for her safety. The Lady Jane frowned. There was something concerning a woman which came momentarily into my head. I have the feeling that if you succeed in your present quest, then you will succeed in being reunited with her. If you fail, then you should never see her again. Corum's smile was grim. Then I must not fail, he said. Well, Baloriag sounds a bit like the meddling monk from the Troughton era Doctor Who. Probably from reading Moorcock Doctor Who, but
I was thinking when I was reading Baloriag, he must appear somewhere else. And I Googled the name.
Yeah.
Because I thought he must be in another book, but I didn't get anything. I mean...
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Because the meddling monk from Troughton era and Doctor Who is another rogue Time Lord who is like a scientist, stroke scholar, stroke sorcerer, depending on where he is and what the technology level is, and who dresses like a monk because it allows him to blend in and get on with his business with a minimum of hassle. So, yeah. And Moorcock was a massive Troughton Doctor Who fan. Who knows?
Yeah,
you never know, do you?
So when was Troughton was late 60s, right?
Yeah.
So
when did Pertwee take over? Was it 1970? I can't remember. But yeah.
I believe so, yeah. Early 70s he was. So,
So yeah, you never know. Maybe a little bit rubbing off. Who knows? Because, Moorcock has been open in saying that Troughton was his doctor and he loved Troughton as Doctor Who, but once Pertwee kicked in and was part of the establishment, he went off Doctor Who altogether. Until, he started writing The Coming of the Terraphiles and started... Although it was before that, it was... I think he says in one of the interviews that he had an operation, and while he was laid up, he started watching Doctor Who and... No, sorry, started watching Doctor Who and reading P.G. Wodehouse again. Which is why his Coming of the Terraphiles novel is basically a P.G. Wodehouse book in space for a big, long period of it. Yeah. But who is Baloriag, and who is Corum's brother, in inverted commas? Well, we'll meet him soon. The next time, when we finish The King of the Swords and crash headlong into something else, perhaps. Well, yes. We'll be going quite a while, and we haven't got to
No spoilers.
the business end of this when the Knight of the Swords crashes headlong into another Michael Moorcock book. The first of two occasions where this really happens, where we get two different perspectives on the same story. King of the Swords Part 2 will also be the Something Something Else Part 2, and they will collide in a massive shock of sparks and power and cosmological upheaval at some point in the new year. What do you reckon, Simon Perrins?
Well, so far, yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the Lady Jane Pentalion sequence, it does go a bit more back into that. Here's some information. Here's a thing. I'm not going to tell you how I know this. I just know it. Go and do it. But up until that point, I mean, I really love that. It's a really nice little short story set inside the book. You know, her tale and her world, and you know, he is such a good writer that he doesn't need to give you a whole book of that world. It's just set inside this. It gives you context. The beginning of the book is a bit of a downer because all the characters you like start being mean to each other.
Yeah.
Which, you know, that can't carry on. You know, that's not great. Duke Tyr is fantastic. He's a I mean, I wasn't thinking of him as Nicolas Cage so much as a sort of Brian Blessed type of Falstaffian, very sort of elaborate, slightly camp character. I think it's definitely better than Queen of the Swords, which did suffer a little bit. But yeah, I mean, we're ramping up and we're getting to the, you know, the fan service. We're getting to the stuff that got me very, very excited as a teenager.
Yeah.
And you can see it coming. You can see. I can't remember whether I read, you know, that other book that we were talking about before I read this one, but it's sort of fascinating. Like in Marvel Comics in the 60s, it would have been like you'd be reading Spider-Man and it would say at the end, read the next issue of Fantastic Four to find out next. But you'd very rarely get the same thing happening from different perspectives. And I always thought that was like very clever and very sort of exciting. And then you'd read it again and you'd go back and read them side by side. Which I think
that's what we're going to do.
So,
yeah, that is exactly what we're going to do. I think we'll do the first part of the something. I don't know. I feel like, don't give any spoilers. But anybody Moorcock fan-wise will know exactly what the fuck we're talking about. But for those there are people who listen to this podcast who don't read Moorcock, but just enjoy listening to us talk about reading Moorcock for some weird reason. Maybe it's the beer talk, which I've not really talked about. By the way, I'm now drinking Black Sheep Blitzen. Phil got me some Christmas-themed Black Sheep beers, and you know what? They're all right. I thought because this is all like basically set in Cornwall and is fairly grounded for part of it, I just got this temptation to just drink old school traditional beer. Yeah, quite enjoyed it, to be honest. But yeah, for whatever reason, so we're not going to spoil it. In January sometime, I'm going to get together with Loz and we're going to do the first part of that book, and then when it gets to the business end, we'll come together and the three of us will look at this story, this scenario, and we will analyse it from the two different perspectives that it is shown from, which will be quite interesting, I think, because thinking back, I distinctly remember reading Sailor on the Seas of Fate and then the Tower of Veloidian Gaznazdiak from Hawkmoon's perspective in The Quest for Tanalorn, and finding it extremely amusing how different Elric is perceived by Hawkmoon from when you get Elric's narrative perspective in Sailor and the Seas of Fate, which I think Moorcock was probably himself being having his tongue perhaps a little bit in his cheek when he was doing some of that stuff in Quest for Tanalorn as well. But I don't really have the same memories of this passage so much, although I do remember the weirdness of the three who are one bit and never being entirely satisfied with it. So it'll be interesting reading it again now. And even then, I might be confusing it and getting it mixed up with Sailor on the Seas of Fate. It's all just like a massive mush in my head. Yeah.
It's so interesting that he did it twice. Maybe he wasn't happy with whichever. I guess this is the first time
Yes.
So maybe he did this and think, okay, but I can make it better and do a better version of it and throw in Hawkmoon.
Well, what is it in like a Japanese TV? A Megazord. You know, you get like the 3001 are like a Megazord, or if that's the right terminology. I always remember reading it and thinking, oh yeah, I'm not entirely don't find that entirely satisfying, but we'll see. We'll see. Yeah. Well, you know what? Thank you very much, as ever, for coming along, and thank you for your patience when we had to reschedule again, which always seems to happen when we record, but it's just one of those things, I guess. And thank you for your work on the amazing Christmas card, which will be going out to Patreon Demons very, very shortly. And
I enjoyed doing it.
Good. And we will, if I don't talk to you before Crimble, have a smashing Christmas, and we will reconvene in the new year to finish this book off.
We certainly will. Have a great Christmas yourself. And
we're still in November.
When you release this, Merry Christmas, listeners.
We're still in November recording this, but I think by the time it goes out, it'll be apt that we can say Merry Christmas to each other. So fuck it, Merry Christmas. Massive thanks to Simon for coming back once again to talk Moorcock, music, and whatever else occurred to us, and also for all of his terrific work for this podcast. Turns out, Brutal Planet by Alice Cooper was released in the year 2000, so 24 years ago. Crikey. And when I said Phoenix in the Sword, I meant Phoenix in Obsidian. Duh. I'm getting my Dragon in the Sword and my Phoenix in Obsidian mixed up there. But anyway, we'll soon be back in the new year to pick up the remainder of the King of the Swords and see just how it crashes into another novel released that same year of 1971. It may involve our very first conjunction of the spheres here in Derry and Toms. And we'll be back very soon with our annual birthday special, so watch out for that in the next couple of weeks. As always, that will hit the airwaves, stream oscillations, tinterwebs, whatever. It'll be out as always on Mike and Phil's birthday, December the 18th. Episode 100. What a journey. And we might squeeze episode 101 in too before the end of the year. We'll see. But thanks as always to our patrons for keeping this show on the road. First, those without tier. Anthony Piconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster and Sebastian Weetabix. And to our chaos engineers, Aid Von Stout, Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Spong, Andrew Van Ness, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Ben Hagar, Brandon Mays, Dan Charnley, Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Jupp, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Matt Saltz, Michael Hopwood, Nick Hopkinson, Ofer Ziv, Paul McRandall, PJ Cooper, Scott Butler, Simon Perrins, and our crafty jugaderos Christian Hundal, Graham Holden, Kevin Williams, Liam Turner, Loz, Mark Taylor, Matthew Broom, Murray Palmer, Sean Twist, Toby White, and Taylor Lavery, and eternal thanks to our patron demons. First up, a new arrival at the tables of fate, Johan Hjarper. Welcome, Johan. And Action Edmonds, Alistair Davison, Andrew Clark, Andy Darby, David Lee, Derek Clunan, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Glenn Sawyer, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, Jenny Stim, Jason Vogel, Joachim Sund, Joe Monty, Jonathan Sharp, Lee Gary, Marius Latauskas, Mark Hebden, Miles Reed-Labato, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, Tony Malazzo, the OG patron Norman Beresford, and last but never least, Robert McMillan. Okay, enough of my yakking. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @BreakfastRuins, and I'm on Mastodon and Blue Sky where I'm Stimbot5000. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. BITR Breakfast in the Ruins Radio is live on Radio Garden or via the web player at breakfastintheruinsradio.blogspot.com. We have our Patreon page too. There are a few extra odds and sods on there. But for now, take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.